Picture the coldest day of your life, the kind of freeze that steals your breath and your hope. And now imagine you have one loaf of bread, one sick child, and one impossible choice. Keep your family alive, or save the stranger who might not survive the next hour. The decision Ethan Cole makes in the next 60 seconds will detonate across Wall Street boardrooms, set a forgotten town on fire with news crews, and uncover a secret that even billions of dollars couldn't hide. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. The day had begun in darkness long before dawn, when Ethan pressed the back of his hand to Henry's forehead and felt heat like smoldering coals buried under thin skin. The boy's breaths rasped, each inhale a small rebellion against whatever infection gnawed his lungs, and the thermometer's red line stalled at 103. Dr. Albright, who served 3 counties with a battered sedan and bottomless patience, had left a handwritten note after yesterday's visit. Cefuroxime, full bottle, twice daily, do not delay. Ethan read the note again, under the yellow bulb of the kitchen lamp, even though he knew its every curl and dot, then pried open the flour bin out of habit. Only a dusting remained, too little for porridge, and nowhere near enough for multiple loaves. Yet he scraped the sides, coaxing each stubborn grain into the bowl while recalling Clara's easy laugh when she taught him to knead dough back in their first summer on the farm. His late wife believed bread was nothing but patience, made edible, that a slow rise carried within it the heartbeat of the home. Now, with the rooster still mute outside and the frost thick on the window pane, Ethan mixed what remained of last year's wheat with a handful of rye he had planned to save as seed. He added honey stolen from the final jar on the shelf, scalded water from the kettle, a whisper of salt, and the last knob of yeast that slumbered in a paper packet for emergencies. In the silence between the kettle's hiss and the stove's crackle, he heard Henry cough upstairs and whispered a vow into the dough. If faith could ferment, then maybe this loaf would rise enough to barter for medicine. 3 hours later, the bread emerged from the iron oven pot, crust mahogany and split with steam, scent rich enough to drown the sharp odor of antiseptic that still lingered in the hallway after Dr. Albright's visit. Ethan wrapped the loaf in coarse linen, slid it into his satchel beside Clara's locket, for luck, though he would never admit such superstition, and pulled on the jacket he had patched and repatched until each sleeve told its own story in mismatched thread. Sarah O'Malley, the neighbor who believed everyone's grief was a shared chore, arrived just as he tied the last bootlace. She shooed him out with promises to check Henry's temperature every hour and to keep broth simmering. Ethan caught her hand, squeezed silent thanks, and stepped into a world of ice that did not care how good a man he tried to be. The journey to Wyndham Crossing should have taken 40 minutes by truck, but the pickup's fuel tank had echoed hollow 2 days prior, and the last gallon already sacrificed to keep the generator running for Henry's MREs. Vaporizer. So Ethan walked. Drifts swallowed the road markings, hedges vanished into spectral shapes, and the storm flattened sound until his own breathing drummed loud inside his ears. He measured distance by the bitter ache creeping from toes to calves, and by the houses he passed in hazy succession. The Harper Dairy, where no smoke rose from the chimney, because the Harpers spent their winter in Arizona with in-laws. The Wilson Ranch, where holiday lights still blinked bravely under a skin of frost. The Connolly Orchard skeletal against the pewter sky. Each landmark reminded him of years when harvests yielded plenty, when neighbors swapped bushels in friendly competition, when he and Clara danced in the barn loft after sunsets that bled peach and tangerine. Instead of this grim steel, by the time Wyndham's stone church steeple appeared, its cross smeared by swirling snow, Ethan's eyelashes held tiny icicles, and his thighs burned with cold. But inside the satchel, the loaf remained warm, the promise intact. He quickened his step past the Sinclair Hotel's shuttered veranda, where summer tourists once sipped lemonade, and turned onto Main, boots crunching salt scattered by shopkeepers. Cooperson's General Store sat opposite the only gas station in town. Its glass windows displayed canned goods arranged in pyramids, next to a handwritten sign apologizing for supply chain delays and requesting patience. Ethan paused under the awning to brush snow from his shoulders, rehearsing his plea. 1 loaf for 1 bottle, or at least half. He would bring fresh vegetables come spring. He would sign a note. He tugged the door handle but stopped as motion caught his eye across the street. A bus bench, half buried against a chain-link fence, held a single occupant. The woman, no, a girl, perhaps early 20s, sat hunched, knees drawn toward her chest, wet strands of dark blonde hair pasted to cheeks bleached by cold. Fabric clung to her like damp paper, a thin canvas jacket zip broken halfway so the collar gaped uselessly. Her shoes, stylish leather flats ill-suited to snow, were soaked through, toes blanching. She stared at the street with an unfocused gaze that made her seem carved from alabaster rather than alive. A plastic grocery bag lay at her feet, the bottom ripped so its contents, a bruised apple, an empty water bottle, skittered on the pavement whenever a gust swept by. Pedestrians hurried past, collars up, offering glances of pity quickly smothered by self-preservation. Ethan knew that reflex. He too had warded these last months, guarding meager resources from every new plea. But now, with his own desperation snug against his ribs, he felt no judgment for the passers-by, only a sudden clarity that a line had been drawn in front of him, and he must choose which side to stand on. Clara would have scolded him if he pretended not to see hunger in someone else's eyes. She used to quote her grandmother, "You cannot outgive need, but you can outlove fear." Ethan's hand tightened around the satchel strap. He looked at Cooperson's door, then back at the solitary figure, noting how her shoulders shook without rhythm, a sign of deep chill, not mere discomfort. He stepped off the curb, snow curling over boot tops, and crossed. The wind tunneled between buildings, nearly stripping the words from his mouth. "Ma'am," he began, voice rough with cold and nerves. Her gaze flickered, but did not settle. Up close he saw that her pupils were pinpricks, a mix of panic and exhaustion. "I have something that might help." He eased the loaf from the satchel. Steam puffed into the frigid air, carrying the perfume of honey and grain. The girl's nostrils flared, like a startled deer. She spoke, but the wind snatched most of it. He caught only "not yours can't." Ethan crouched to her level, ignoring the wet that seeped through his jeans. "Take it," he said, words steady though his heart hammered against ribs thin with worry. "You need it more than I do." Her fingers drifted toward the loaf, then withdrew as though expecting a trick. He broke a chunk, offered it again. She stared another heartbeat, then seized it and bit, lips trembling around the crust. Tears welled and spilled before she tasted a second mouthful, and with them came a sob that sounded half apology, half gratitude. Ethan set the remaining bread in her lap, tucking the linen around to shield steam. "There's a diner 2 blocks down," he told her. "Ask for Mabel, she'll get you coffee." A spark of alarm surfaced in her eyes at the prospect of entering a public place, but the bread beckoned louder. She nodded, unable to voice thanks past a lump in her throat. Ethan stood, joints complaining, and returned to Cooperson's while she devoured another piece with an urgency that made his own hunger stab. Inside the store, fluorescent lights buzzed. The pharmacist, Mr. Callahan, wore spectacles that magnified his frown when Ethan placed the empty satchel on the counter and explained his situation. "I have no cash, only credit for next harvest," Ethan concluded. "But you've seen our yields." Callahan rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I wish I could float another IOU, Ethan, truly. Fact is, wholesalers demand upfront delivery now. I can give you half dosage for half price, that's $43. He glanced at the satchel as though hoping fresh eggs or cured bacon might appear. Ethan's shoulders sagged. He had not expected charity here, yet the blunt arithmetic still stung. "I'll owe the rest come planting," he said. "And I'll do repairs around your place if needed." Callahan considered, eyes softening. Wyndham folk carried unwritten ledgers of small favors, and Ethan's column ran long with kindness, even if his balance sheet stood empty. The pharmacist fetched the vial, printed a label, and slid it forward. "Bring me fence posts this spring. Cedar, not pine. We'll call it even." Relief swept through Ethan, loosening muscles clenched since dawn. He thanked Callahan, tucked the medicine deep inside his coat, and stepped back into swirling snow. The bus bench was empty now, only a scatter of crumbs marking where the girl had sat. He thought of following, but the drugstore clock chimed noon. Henry needed the first dose soon. What Ethan could not know was that the gas station across the street, part of a regional chain owned by Sinclair Petroleum, recorded every angle of Maine for liability reasons. Its lens, freshly upgraded to HD, captured his approach, the offering of the loaf, the girl's tears, and his departure. The footage would remain unnoticed until a shift manager later flagged it as unusual, and from there it would travel through digital veins to change lives. Ethan hurried east, wind now at his back, boots sinking deeper as drifts collected. Yet each step felt lighter, because the vial tapped his chest in rhythm with hope, and because he trusted that someone out there, even a stranger, had eaten enough to make it through the storm. The girl, Ava Sinclair, stumbled toward the diner, but paused outside its fogged windows. Heat shimmered within, silhouettes nursing mugs and bowls. She imagined the bell above the door announcing her, imagined faces turning, calculating her worth from torn clothes and tangled hair. Panic tightened around her like a second jacket. She retreated down the alley between buildings, clutching what remained of the loaf. Steam vents along the Sinclair Hotel's south wall exhaled warm air that curled the very snow into ghostly ribbons. Ava found a laundry chute propped open and ducked inside, heart hammering. Industrial dryers rumbled beneath fluorescent lights, and linen carts stood in neat rows. The heat wrapped her like a quilt. She slid behind stacked towels and let tears fall until the world blurred. For a time, she simply breathed. The bread's sweetness lingered on her tongue, stirring memories of brioche at posh brunches, croissants dusted with gold leaf, culinary extravagance she had once taken for granted, then rejected in her flight from Manhattan. Yet no morsel had tasted as alive as this humble loaf, carried miles through a blizzard by a man who owed nothing to her. She pictured his face, coarse with stubble, eyes amber like late harvest wheat, kindness etched into crow's feet. He had offered sustenance without asking why she sat alone in ruin. That anonymity calmed her more than any credit card could have. He had seen hunger, not scandal or ransom value. Ava hugged her knees, thinking back to the argument with her father 8 nights ago in the penthouse study. Harold Sinclair Sr. had outlined her duties for the hotel group's winter gala. Speeches, press photographs, a silent auction benefiting a foundation that existed more for tax strategy than altruism. She had asked to defer her role, to volunteer instead at the community shelter her friend managed in the Bronx, seeking something real among cardboard beds and chipped mugs. Harold's disappointment shifted to fury, culminating in barked commands to staff to double the PR itinerary. That night Ava booked a one-way bus ticket under the alias Anna Sawyer, convinced she could vanish into America and discover who she was without the Sinclair name. She had anticipated hardships, cheap motels, maybe dishwashing work, anonymity disguised as freedom. She had not anticipated a thief lifting her wallet when passengers slept, nor the bus engine seizing outside Bloomington, nor a storm so savage that county roads closed. She had walked the last mile into Wyndham because police directed travelers to a school gym for shelter, but she chose solitude, unwilling yet to reveal her face. 2 nights on a church cot drained shoulders of their defiance, and when supplies of donated snacks dwindled, she ventured out, only to find streets deserted and her bravado shattered by cold that crawled into bones. That was when the farmer had appeared. An hour passed in the laundry room before exhaustion overcame vigilance. Ava curled between warm towels, bread tucked safe against her chest, and slept. Hotel staff found her near shift change, a desk clerk named Lila, who recognized Ava's face from company internet newsletters. The shock nearly made Lila drop her clipboard, but she threw a blanket over the sleeping air, hushed questions from others, and phoned Harold directly. At that moment, Harold Sinclair paced the marble floor of his Manhattan office, ignoring a view that commanded half the skyline. His personal security team had traced Ava to Bloomington, then lost the trail. A blizzard hampered searches. Harold's guilt spiraled each hour she remained missing, amplified by media speculation that she had been kidnapped. Abductors had sent no ransom note, and the possibility that his daughter had fled voluntarily pricked deeper than any extortion. He hired private investigators, consulted state troopers, and scoured bus routes. Yet all answers eluded him, until his phone buzzed with Lila's trembling voice. When Harold saw the grainy security stills Lila forwarded, Ava ravenous on a bench, a stranger kneeling, offering bread, his breath locked. The timestamp read, 11:06 a.m. The location tag, Wyndham Crossing. Relief surged first, then an aching curiosity about the farmer who had quelled her hunger. Harold ordered his jet prepared for dawn departure, and directed corporate communications to stall press leaks. But before dawn, he watched the footage on loop, fixating on the moment the stranger's gloved hands lifted the bread, as though presenting an offering at an altar. What kind of loss, Harold wondered, teaches a person to give away the last cushion between them and despair? That question shadowed him through the night, bothering him more than board takeovers or lawsuits ever had. Ethan reached home mid-afternoon, frost crusting his beard. Sarah ushered him inside, pointing toward Henry who dozed under quilts, cheeks flushed but breathing easier. Ethan slipped the vial from his coat, measured the first dose into apple juice, and coaxed the boy awake to drink. Henry grimaced at bitterness but swallowed, trusting his father's soft assurances. Then the farmer sat on the edge of the bed until the child's eyelids drooped again. Only when he saw the rhythm of healthy sleep take hold did Ethan exhale the dread he had carried since dawn. That night wind rattled shutters like a polite but persistent creditor. Ethan stood by the kitchen window, palms pressed to cold sill, and let the storm's hiss fill his head. He imagined the girl, Ava, though he did not know her name, sitting somewhere warm now, maybe in the diner as he suggested, maybe in the hotel lobby among poinsettias. Yet a nagging unease whispered that her eyes had held more than hunger. They hid a bruise of deeper trouble. He shook himself free of speculation. He had no room for other woes while his own farm teetered. Still, as he rinsed the empty satchel, he pictured her face until sleep finally called him upstairs. In a conference room at Wyndham's Sinclair Hotel the next morning, Harold sat opposite Ava wrapped in blankets, cheeks flushed from embarrassment more than fever. Their reunion was quiet. Instead of lectures, he offered tea, his voice etched with the tired grace of a man who realized the boundaries he had enforced had become walls. Ava, recounting her journey, withheld nothing: the stolen wallet, the church cot, the hunger. She described the farmer in reverent detail, the steam curling from bread, the gentle firmness of his insistence. Harold listened, absorbing each word the way dry soil drinks sudden rain. "Why did you run?" he asked at last. "Because everything I touched felt staged," she said. "I needed to know who I was without scripts." She brushed crumbs from her lap, looking small despite the grand room. "He didn't recognize me, Dad. He saw a person first." Harold folded his hands. "Then, he deserves our gratitude." Ava's jaw set. "He deserves more than a fruit basket. You should visit in person." Harold nodded, surprising her. "I intend to." He already planned to bring not only thanks, but also tangible relief, though what shape it would take, he had yet to decide. Money was easy. Meaningful restitution required listening. They spent the afternoon making arrangements. Harold refused a media entourage Ava insisted on traveling too. By sunset, 2 black SUVs waited, tire chains fitted. Lila handed Ava a proper coat, but Ava kept the jacket borrowed from a laundry clerk draped over her arm, a reminder of humility. On the farm, Ethan patched a broken hinge on the chicken coop, tasks that could not wait for storms to pass. Henry, improving, watched through the window, tracing finger circles on frosted glass. Sarah hummed while preparing broth and told the boy that a watched pot might never boil, but a watched father worked faster. Henry giggled, cough dissolving into laughter. Ethan brushed snow off hay bales, each motion rhythmic, but his mind drifted to overdue bills. The bank's grace period ended next month. Foreclosure papers sat unopened in the drawer, haunting him. He had hoped to renegotiate after spring planting, but financiers had grown cold as the season. He set that dread aside as the sun fought through gray, painting the field in weak gold. Somewhere beyond those hills, he thought, someone owed him nothing, yet owed someone else everything. He could not explain the sensation, except that for the first time in weeks, he did not feel utterly alone. What he didn't see, miles away on the interstate, were headlights piercing spindrift as Harold's convoy rolled west, bearing contracts drafted but unsigned, bearing a daughter determined to repay kindness in currency deeper than dollars, bearing a question: could wealth reinforce rather than overshadow compassion? They would arrive soon enough, and that arrival would ring louder than any auctioneer's gavel. For now, Ethan shut the barn doors against the biting wind, unaware that destiny, restless in the passenger seat of an approaching car, had already set its GPS coordinates on his battered mailbox. The loaf he baked had left his hands, but its story had only begun to rise. Snow thinned to a lazy sift of flakes the morning the two black SUVs nosed past Wyndham's stone church and curled down the county road toward Ethan Cole's farm, their engines humming a bass note that floated across silent fields like the first low drum roll before a parade. Harold Sinclair, traveling in the lead vehicle, sat angled forward despite the heated leather seats, trying to memorize every landmark his phone's satellite view had labeled earlier. The Connolly Orchard skeletal against the pale sky, the Wilson Ranch with its sagging holiday lights, the Harper Dairy barns shuttered for winter hibernation. He told himself these details mattered because they were the bones of the place that had sheltered his daughter when wealth, security clearances, and all the sophistication of Manhattan had failed. But a sharper truth pricked him each time he blinked, that he was nervous, a feeling as alien to him as a plowshare would be at a board meeting. Harold Sinclair, who negotiated hotel acquisitions worth hundreds of millions, now rehearsed simple courtesy, aware that no siding bonus could equate a last loaf freely given in the heart of a blizzard. In the back seat, Ava leaned forward as well, palms braced on the console, eyes scanning the white horizon with the alertness of someone searching for something more profound than a mailbox. She wore the borrowed laundry clerk coat, its hem brushing her boots, and had refused the stylist her father sent at dawn, saying she would meet the farmer as herself, not as a press release wearing lipstick. She tucked strands of hair behind her ear and worried that her gratitude would tumble out as melodrama. The previous night she had slept fitfully, dreams mixing bus brakes screeching with the warmth of rye bread, and woke all convinced that if she did not repay Ethan's trust in a way that mattered, she might never find a sense of worth beyond her last name. The convoy crested a ridge where the valley yawned wide, and everyone fell briefly silent. Ahead lay quilted fields stitched by stone fences, now buried under snow, a red barn half bowed by years of wind, and beyond that, a farmhouse whose roof showed missing shingles like a grin with teeth knocked out. Thin columns of smoke wandered up from the chimney, forming a wavering question in the brittle blue sky. Tire tracks curved into the drive, pocked where freezing had locked slush to iron. There was no welcoming ribbon of gravel, no decorative lights, only the raw realism of a place wrestled from weather and mortgages. Harold's driver slowed, tires crunching. Ethan emerged onto the porch, snow dusting his shoulders, surprise flickering before he schooled his expression. The second SUV eased to a halt, its brake lights glowing, and a hush settled over the scene, so deep they could hear the distant chatter of crows scavenging corn stubble. Harold stepped out, boots sinking, breath blooming in front of him. Ava opened the other door and followed, the cold striking her cheeks like a baptism that clarified everything. Ethan descended the steps, pulling his wool coat tighter, instinctively placing himself between these strangers and the window where Henry's face peered. He recognized wealth in the casual precision of their clothes, the gleam of polished leather gloves, the subtle brand name stitched where only insiders could read. But he also noticed their unease, and that sliver of genuineness tempered his guardedness. Harold extended a hand. "Mr. Cole, I am Harold Sinclair. This is my daughter, Ava." The name Sinclair clicked in Ethan's memory, not from newspapers he had no time to read, but from the towering hotel down in Wyndham that cast long afternoon shadows down Main Street. He shook the offered hand, calluses rasping against soft leather. Ava took a half step forward, her voice catching. "I never thank you. You saved me more than you know." She wanted to say more, but the words snagged behind emotion. Ethan glanced from daughter to father, uncertain what apology or gratitude he ought to answer first. "I'm glad you're safe," he said, and, because honesty was habit, added, "I hoped you found somewhere warm." "I did," Ava replied, "because of you." Harold cleared his throat, business instincts flaring though he tried to keep them bridled. "Mr. Cole, I came for 3 reasons. First, to return the kindness offered my child. Second, to ensure you suffer no hardship for that generosity. Third, to propose an opportunity I believe could benefit you, the town, and the larger region." Ethan's brows knit. Offers dressed in such polished wording usually arrived by certified mail or came laminated beneath a bank logo. "I'm listening," he said, but did not invite them inside. He looked toward Henry waving through the glass, then back at the visitors. Ava noticed and lifted a gloved hand to greet the boy. Henry grinned, his freckles vivid against pale skin. Snow squeaked as Harold shifted his stance. "The storm footage has surfaced online," he explained, "and while we are controlling official narratives, the image of you giving that loaf is traveling fast. There will be reporters. Before any circus begins, I wish to secure what you may need, starting with your farm note." Harold signaled to his driver, who opened the SUV and produced a slim briefcase. Inside lay a cashier's check already endorsed, the amount large enough to buy 3 farms this size outright, plus a simple 1-page document outlining the intention. Full settlement of Ethan's mortgage with the county bank, discharge of late fees, and establishment of a zero-interest line of credit for future operating costs. Ethan did not reach for the case. Cold air pinched his ears, but his voice stayed even. "Why would you do that?" Ava answered, stepping forward until her boots nudged adrift. "Because I'm alive to ask you not to refuse." She told him about the wallet stolen on the bus, how she had walked until her shoes soaked through, how hopelessness curdled everything until the smell of his bread cut through the numbness. "You could have kept walking. Instead you gave away what was probably your family's meal. That isn't charity, it's bravery." Ethan's gaze drifted past them to the dilapidated barn. He thought of Henry coughing through the night, of the bank letters, of Clara's locket in his pocket. A swirl of pride and shame tangled in his chest. "I'm no hero," he murmured. "A neighbor would have done the same." Harold disagreed quietly. "No, sir. Many would have turned aside. I did, in my own way, when my daughter pleaded for purpose, and I failed to listen." His voice thinned, each word chiseled. "Let me correct a wrong by honoring yours." Still, Ethan hesitated. He had learned that large favors often hid hooks. "What does this opportunity entail?" Harold glanced at Ava, then faced Ethan squarely. "Sinclair Holdings wants to establish a pilot program here in regenerative grain production. We supply capital, equipment, and access to specialty markets. You provide land stewardship and local expertise. Profits split equitably, and ownership of your acreage remains solely yours." He outlined ideas: organic certification, rotational grazing, a training center for young farmers, agritourism packages bringing urban families to experience planting and harvest. Every proposal ended with the phrase, "Only if you wish." Ethan absorbed the rush of possibilities, but suspicion pricked at old wounds. Partnerships could warp into dependency. And if the venture fails, then Sinclair bears the loss, Harold answered. "Your home is never collateral." Before Ethan could respond, the farmhouse door creaked and Sarah called, "Lunch is ready. Bring your guests in before they freeze." Her voice carried the authority of a woman unimpressed by luxury vehicles. Ethan flushed, but motioned the Sinclairs toward the porch. "Come warm yourselves," he offered, still uncertain, yet unwilling to appear inhospitable. Inside, the kitchen was cramped, warmth radiating from a potbelly stove, and the smells of vegetable broth and baking soda biscuits. Harold removed his gloves carefully, as though stepping into a sacred space. Ava shrugged off the borrowed coat, hanging it on a peg beside Ethan's patched jacket. Sarah set mismatched mugs of coffee on the table and introduced herself with a firm handshake that folded Harold's manicured fingers into hers. Henry peered up at the tall strangers, eyes wide. Ava crouched to his level. "I owe you Dad a great deal. she said. "May I sit by you?" Henry nodded solemnly. Sarah poured second helpings before anyone asked, reading tension like a seasoned referee. The table, though scarred, felt suddenly like neutral ground, where negotiations bowed to the older ritual of breaking bread. Ironically, the biscuits were made with store flour because Ethan's grain tins were empty, but Ava declared them the best she had tasted, her sincerity melting any hint of flattery. As spoons clinked in bowls, Harold studied the kitchen's details. Linoleum cracked near the sink, a photograph of Clara beside a jar of dried wildflowers, the quilts folded on a chair back. These were the real equity, he realized, and he was a trespasser unless he treated them with reverence. He described the pilot program vision again, slower, using plain language, drawing diagrams on Henry's sketchpad. Ethan listened, interrupting occasionally to question soil testing costs or lease boundaries. Harold answered patiently, surprised by the genuine excitement in describing cover crop benefits rather than EBITDA. When lunch ended, Sarah ushered Henry into the living room, where sunlight puddled on the braided rug, leaving the adults at the table. Ethan folded his hands. "I need to see paperwork and have my lawyer read it," he said. "And I'd want the community involved. Too many outside ventures arrive, make promises, then vanish after extracting value." "Agreed," Harold replied. "My counsel can meet yours whenever you prefer. And any decision will be public before signed." Ethan's skepticism softened. Still, pride flickered. "About the mortgage, I intended to repay myself once harvest rebounds." Harold inclined his head. "Consider the debt settled anonymously then. The bank can merely record it as cleared. No hoopla. If anonymity helps, so be it." Ava reached across the table, laying her hand lightly on Ethan's wrist. "Please, let me help. If our positions had been reversed, I might not have survived the storm. Your kindness is the thread holding this entire tapestry. We're only adding color." That imagery startled Ethan with its earnestness. He rubbed the back of his neck. "All right," he said finally, voice husky. "But understand, I'm not selling my story to tabloids." "You have my word," Harold answered. And it was one of the rare times in his career it felt like more than a formality. News of the Sinclairs' arrival spread through Wyndham quicker than thaw on a tin roof. Cooperson's cashier told the mail carrier who told the pastor's wife who texted half the congregation. Within hours, rumor blossomed. The billionaire was buying up farmland, Ethan had sold his soul, Ava was filming a reality show. Photographers and SUVs prowled the church parking lot hoping to snap the heiress in muck boots. The local paper, the Wyndham Sentinel, sent a reporter who had once been in Henry's daycare class. Ethan met him at the gate and traded 5 minutes of straight facts for a promise of responsible coverage. He did not mention the mortgage gift, only the proposal for a regenerative pilot program seeking county partnerships. Banker Dale Rutherford, whose office lined with hunting trophies overlooked Maine's only intersection, read the Sentinel draft before print thanks to a cousin on the editorial board. Panic etched lines deeper between his brows. If Sinclair Holdings injected capital at zero interest, Rutherford's leverage over struggling farmers would evaporate. He drafted letters hinting that outside investors often withdrew when profits lagged, leaving locals in fresh debt. Those letters slid under doors after dark, sowing suspicion. Meanwhile, Ava refused to hole up in the hotel. She moved into the spare room Sarah offered, trading formal dresses for Henry's spare flannel shirt and a pair of overalls borrowed from Ethan's late wife's trunk. Every dawn she followed Ethan to the barn to feed chickens, her laughter chasing sparrows from rafters, her breath curling white beside his. She asked questions, scribbled notes on seed germination, learned to set fence posts by sighting down the row like archers align arrows. In the evenings, she Skyped with her friend in the Bronx shelter, describing compost piles with the same fervor she once reserved for DJ playlists. Harold, lodged in the Wyndham Hotel for convenience, commuted out daily, tie absent, wearing a parka he had owned for years but never tested. He surprised himself by how quickly farm vocabulary felt natural on his tongue. One afternoon, he and Ethan hiked the frozen creek edge to mark out the 20-acre demonstration plot. Sun shone weak through high cloud, casting the landscape in monotone gray touched with silver. Ethan tapped the frozen soil with his boot. "Come spring, we'll need to rip this field," Add clover for nitrogen, maybe a scatter of vetch. Harold nodded, though he only half understood, trusting Ethan's instinct. He carried survey flags in one hand, the other stuffed in a pocket alongside a business card he never intended to hand over, a contact at the Department of Agriculture who could fast-track conservation grants. He had learned enough to see that offering resources quietly sometimes meant more than grand gestures. They planted flags while geese arrowed overhead, conversation weaving between crop rotations and fatherhood. At a pause, Harold dared a personal question. "Your wife Clara, you speak of her often." Ethan inhaled crisp air tinged with pine. "She loved this view," he said, gesturing toward the ridgeline. "Said hills should kneel to sky so people remember humility." His eyes softened. "Cancer took her quick. Bread kept me sane afterward. She taught me kneading is prayer." Harold swallowed. "I failed at prayer when my wife passed," he admitted, voice low. "I drowned in expansion plans instead." Ethan offered a flag. "We all choose our lifelines. Sometimes they choose us." Words simple as seed, but they rooted deep into Harold's conscience. The first signed document was not a contract, but a compact crafted one evening around the farmhouse table. Ethan, Harold, Ava, Sarah, and the county agricultural extension officer drafted 6 bullet points. Sustainability before profit, transparency in all decisions, local hiring priority, educational outreach to schools, emergency support fund for neighbors, and annual evaluation by an external board. They each signed, even Henry, who scrawled a crooked H that made everyone laugh. That laughter dispersed lingering tension like sun-dissolving frost. But friction still waited beyond porch light. A week later, as thaw began, and ditches gurgled with meltwater, 2 SUVs from a cable news channel rumbled into town. They requested interviews, offering generous fees for heartfelt exclusives. Ava declined. Ethan closed the gate. The crew set up camp near the old mill, broadcasting speculative live shots about class divides and redemption arcs. Comment sections flooded. Some hailed Ethan hero. Others accused Sinclair of laundering reputation. The noise bothered Ava until Ethan asked her to help check the maple taps for the first syrup run. The simplicity of SAP plinking into tin buckets calmed her nerves, each drop a reminder that stories longest remembered are written slowly by nature itself. Banker Rutherford tried subtler sabotage. He hosted a luncheon for local landowners, framing Ethan's partnership as a wedge that could raise property taxes if tourism traffic spiked. He handed out folders predicting inheritance complications. Yet when he approached old Mrs. Thompson with a refinance offer, she reminded him that Ethan once rebuilt her porch steps for free after her husband died, and she trusted Ethan's judgment above Rutherford's ass. Spreadsheets. Word spread that the banker's motive smelled of self-preservation rather than altruism. A more potent threat arose from nature, or rather, what nature masked. The barn's electrical wiring, gnawed by mice during winter, shorted one windy night. Sparks smoldered in damp straw, until sudden draft fanned them into flames. Ava, returning from town with a sack of screws, saw orange flicker through cracks, and screamed for Ethan. He, Harold, and Sarah mobilized instantly, hauling buckets from the rain barrel, beating at embers with wool blankets. Flames licked beams older than the Constitution, groaning as timbers charred. Sirens wailed distant, roads slick with mud delaying the volunteer fire truck. Ethan clambered into smoke to free the 2 remaining dairy goats, face streaked with soot. Harold followed, ignoring Ava's plea, dragging a hose sputtering at the limit of the well pump. They battled until the fire crew roared in, axes and hoses turning back the blaze just shy of the hayloft. By dawn, half the barn stood blackened, roof collapsed. The cost might have crippled Ethan, had the mortgage still weighed on him. Yet as the sun rose pale, neighbors arrived with hammers, delivering lumber left over from their own projects, raising a coffee urn on a makeshift table. Ava filmed none of it, choosing to stack salvaged boards alongside Sarah, while Henry handed out donuts the pastor's wife donated. Exhausted, Harold sat on a stump, hair singed, coat reeking of smoke, and realized this labor, unbilled and unlauded, felt more significant than any ribbon-cutting ceremony he ever staged. He looked at Ethan, who, despite losing half a barn, thanked each volunteer by name. Neither spoke about Dad's work. Itself was dialogue. The fire ironically cemented public support. The Sentinel headline read, "Community saves farmer, who saved heiress." Even skeptics noticed that Ethan still lived in the same drafty house, drove the same rust-bitten truck. Clearly he had not cashed a golden ticket for personal luxury. Meanwhile, Harold diverted corporate public relations budgets to buy new lumber from local mills, ensuring the economic ripple spread. Banker Rutherford attempted to spin the fire as evidence of unsafe conditions, but insurance inspectors praised Ethan's maintenance and filed the cause as accidental. Rutherford's influence crumbled further. Within 3 weeks, the barn rose again, red paint bright against melting snowbanks. Ava, perched on scaffolding, stenciled a small emblem near the ridgepole, 2 hands cupping a loaf, beneath it the words "Share freely." She used leftover white paint and good calligraphy she learned in prep school, connecting past privilege to present purpose in one steady stroke. March arrived wearing alternating masks of winter and spring. Some mornings brought storms, others thaw and sun. But the demonstration field thawed too, dark soil appearing in patches like islands in a white sea. Ethan taught Ava to judge when the ground was fit to till by squeezing handfuls until they crumbled rather than balled. She delighted in every earthy scent, every earthworm revealed. Harold traveled to the state capitol to lobby for grant matching for conservation drainage. At a legislative breakfast, he left his prepared statement aside and spoke instead of a loaf of bread that traveled 6 miles in a storm, turning strangers into allies. Lawmakers accustomed to statistical arguments found themselves leaning forward as if the sweetness of that bread hovered in the air. The appropriation passed committee later that day. At the farm, Ethan and Ava walked row lines to plan seed spacing. They paused at the stone Henry helped place, over Clara's favored tulip patch. Ava traced its carving. Plant kindness. Harvest hope. She whispered that the phrase might anchor a school curriculum they were mapping with the agricultural extension officer. Visiting children would plant rye seeds and write stories about generosity growing. Ethan nodded, the vision warming him more than the weak sun overhead. One afternoon, Ava confessed she dreaded returning to Manhattan. Ethan looked at the barn, at Henry skipping stones across a puddle, at Sarah humming in the doorway. "Manhattan may need you more than we do," he said. "But you'll have soil under your nails now. That doesn't wash off so easy." Ava laughed, showing him her stained fingertips. "Good," she said. "I hope it stains every ivory cuff I ever wear." As April neared, preparations shifted into high gear. Ordering organic seed, calibrating the refurbished grain drill, hosting town meetings where concerns about tourist traffic were hashed out into cooperative ventures like farm stay rooms and a craft market. Ethan spoke little at these gatherings, but when he did, his words carried weight because people remembered the loaf. During one heated exchange about traffic permits, Ethan noted quietly that if city families saw how much labor went into feeding them, maybe they would push for fairer farm policies. The room fell silent, and the motion passed unanimously. Social media buzzed anew when Ava's friend from the Bronx shelter posted photos of Ava in coveralls holding a lamb. Critics claiming publicity stunt were drowned by comments praising volunteerism. In private messages, Ava urged followers to donate to regional food banks rather than send gifts. Donations spiked 400% in 1 week. By the equinox, the soil warmed to planting temperature. Morning light turned fields the color of pearl, and frost withdrew to forest edges. On the day they seeded the demonstration plot, the entire community came, each person given a row section. Children scattered crimson clover seeds before grain drill passes. Elders poured cups of vetch into hoppers. Cameras filmed, yes, but Harold hired local teenagers as the film crew, investing in skill sets rather than importing professionals. Ethan watched Harold push a planter while Ava guided a row marker. He remembered his own father planting this very acreage with horses, the seeds falling despite drought fears, trust in the unseen. He felt that trust thrumming now, stretching outward beyond property lines into the future Henry and other children would inherit. Late afternoon found the crew gathered for a picnic on the rebuilt barn's threshold. Sarah ladled stew, the scent of thyme and onion mingling with fresh-turned earth. A portable speaker played fiddle tunes. Banker Rutherford arrived, hat in hand, contrition etched like frostbite scars. He offered low-interest restructuring proposals for other farmers, citing new state funds inspired by the Sinclair Project. Ethan accepted the olive branch on behalf of neighbors, though he caught the irony that the banker, too, now sought regeneration. As dusk bled pink and blue across the sky, Ava produced a small cutting board. On it rested a loaf nearly identical to the one Ethan had given her, baked from his recipe but using the last store flour and a scoop of honey Henry insisted on adding. She stood, and the chatter lapsed into hush. "I came here lost," she said, voice trembling yet clear, "and a stranger handed me something simple and precious. Today I get it back, shaped by new hands, shared by many hearts." She broke the loaf, steam curling into cool air, and offered the first piece to Ethan, the second to her father, the third to Sarah, then passed the platter until every person held a bite. Even camera lenses misted. They ate, and in that small circle under a sky ladling stars like shy confetti, boundaries blurred. Wheat and rye merged with stories, honey mingled with gratitude, and a new season began not just in the soil, but in the collective imagination of Wyndham Crossing. The night ended with lanterns strung between fence posts, children chasing shadows, adults planning irrigation schedules. Ethan lingered beside Harold, both men sipping cider from mismatched mugs. "I thought wealth meant insulation," Harold mused. "Now I see it can mean circulation, moving where need is greatest." Ethan tipped his mug. "Bread is only bread until it is broken. Then it feeds more than hunger." Ava laughed nearby, hair catching lantern light, and Henry's voice rose in excited explanation of how baby rye shoots would emerge. For once, not a single reporter or financier interrupted. Far off, clouds gathered over distant hills, promising spring rains nodding in approval. And though challenges surely lay ahead, pest infestations, market shifts, personal reckonings, none could unmoor the seed planted that blizzard day. Roots had sunk deep, twining through frost and fire, through fear and generosity, and now they anchored every step forward. Warm rain arrived in late April like a curtain opening, turning the demonstration field the tender green of apple skin almost overnight. Rye bleeds pierced the dark loam first, followed by the iridescent sprawl of clover, whose round leaves caught pearl-sized droplets at dawn so that every row glittered as if sewn with cut glass. Ethan rose before first light each morning to walk the perimeter, leaning on a hickory staff, more for the pleasure of pause than from need, listening for the faint pop and sigh of soil settling. Ava accompanied him, raincoat cinched, recording soil temperature on a notepad that already showed coffee stains and a child's drawing of a rocket labeled Henry's seed flyer. They spoke little before coffee, letting the chorus of frogs in the creek gully fill the quiet, but both felt the pulse of something larger than acreage thrumming beneath their boots. By mid-May, the project had sprouted more than crops. The local high school launched an honors elective called Food from Dirt, teen talk by the county extension officer and, startlingly, Harold Sinclair himself during bi-weekly visits. Students learned to run pH tests on creek water, to map root nodulation on vetch, and to draft grant abstracts. Ethan watched from a distance at first, wary of classrooms invading his work, until a senior named Lily converted drone imagery into yield projections that exceeded Ethan's own mental calculus by 14%. He shook her hand, confessing he never grasped trigonometry, and she replied that she had never understood how to judge rain by smell until he explained petrichor. They both grinned, aware a bridge had been built. But spring carries its own mischief. An invasive armyworm appeared in early June, chewing ragged holes through rye leaves faster than children devour cotton candy. The extension agents supplied pheromone traps, yet numbers climbed. During one emergency dusk meeting in the barn, Ava suggested biological controls. Importing trichogramma wasps, beneficiaries of a research grant she discovered while scrolling agricultural journals at Baya. Midnight. Ethan raised a brow at the idea of releasing stinger-laden cavalry near Henry's play area, but he listened. Harold underwrote the overnight shipment, and by the time the moon waxed full, small cardboard tubes of wasp eggs arrived packed in dry ice. Ava and 2 students sprinkled them among the rows, wearing netted veils, their laughter floating past stalks. Within a week, worm populations plunged, rye rebounded, and Ethan conceded that sometimes you saved a field by inviting in strangers smaller than a fingernail. While the farm wrestled insects, Manhattan buzzed with a different swarm. Sinclair Holdings' quarterly shareholders' meeting approached, and factions within the board whispered that Harold's rustic venture threatened bottom-line optics. One hedge fund representative circulated a memo arguing that devoting executive hours to a 20-acre pilot, however noble, diluted focus from luxury expansion in Singapore. Rumblings grew into an agenda item, a motion to limit further capital outflow to Wyndham unless a measurable profit appeared within 6 months. Harold prepared charts showing preliminary returns, carbon offset valuations, and intangible PR goodwill, yet he knew spreadsheets rarely sway minds already fixed on fast dividends. Ava learned of the motion when she intercepted an email flagged as courtesy copy. Rage simmered. But she remembered Ethan saying that a bully's harvest is fear. Do not water it. Instead, she drafted a plan. Ethan, initially reluctant, eventually agreed, and even Henry offered suggestions, though his mostly involved fireworks spelling "Be kind in the sky." On the last Friday of June, the convoy returned to Manhattan, but this time, Ethan wore his best church shirt, and Sarah accompanied them, leaving Henry in the care of a house-sitting network of neighbors who considered him a district mascot. At the hotel headquarters, glass atrium, Ava orchestrated an exhibition called Earth to Table. The lobby filled with raised beds of living clover, cut from Wyndham sod, honeycombs under plexiglass where bees fanned their wings, and a pop-up bakery station run by Sarah who needed dough with flair that put celebrity chefs to shame. Ethan, standing by burlap sacks of topsoil, invited investors in silk ties to plunge their manicured hands into humus, explaining how microbial life underwrites everything they eat. Astonished murmurs rippled whenever someone discovered that the bread they tasted came from grain once scorched in wildfire. During the formal shareholder address, Harold spoke for 10 minutes, then ceded the podium to Ava. She recounted that blizzard morning, projecting the gas station footage onto a 20-foot screen. A collective hush fell as the room watched Ethan, pixelated yet resolute, hand the loaf to a frost-worn stranger. "This is what unleveraged generosity looks like," she said, voice steady. "It yielded returns none of you can quantify, including my life and a revitalized community. If you doubt the market, ask the soil beneath your fingernails, or ask yourself why the smell of this bread just reminded you of childhood." Silence flooded the room. Then, unexpectedly, the hedge fund representative who authored the limiting motion stood and asked if he could taste the bread. Sarah sliced a warm heel, steam curling upward. He chewed slowly, expression softening, and after a moment withdrew his motion. The meeting closed with a unanimous vote, extending support not merely for Wyndham, but for 5 additional rural pilots across 3 continents. Ethan returned home stunned to find that in modern boardrooms, sense sometimes triumphed over sense. He told Harold privately that he hoped money would not distort the original intention, and Harold promised the new pilots would abide by the same 6 bullet points of the compact. Ava, giddy but exhausted, slept all the way back, dreaming of honeybees perched on skyscraper ledges. July unfurled in waves of heat, air shimmering above asphalt, until distant barns looked like ships afloat. Irrigation lines clicked on at dawn, delivering creek water to thirsty crops, while solar pumps whirred. Tourists arrived in trickles first, families from Boston lured by glossy magazine spreads that called Wyndham Crossing Redemption Country. They rented rooms in converted carriage houses, paid the bottle honey under Henry's supervision, and posted selfies beside the Share Freely emblem now magnified on T-shirts. Local treasuries swelled with tax revenue, but Ethan insisted every visiting group spend 1 hour weeding or compost turning, because a photograph should cost the sweat equivalent of at least a teaspoon. Surprisingly, Vacationers treated the chore like a badge. Midsummer also brought festival season, and the town council decided to revive a defunct tradition. The Windham County Lamplight Fair, last held the year Clara died. The fairground, dormant since, required clearing brush taller than a tractor tire. Volunteers swarmed the site armed with weed whackers, and Harold financed portable stages, though he made certain local carpenters did the building. Ava convinced regional folk bands to perform for reduced fees if food bank donations matched ticket sales. Sarah's Bakery tested new recipes featuring veg flour muffins that tasted better than they sounded, especially glazed with clover honey. Ethan watched preparations with cautious optimism. Large gatherings could strain a farm's rhythm. Yet when Henry rode the Ferris wheel on opening night, squealing at the aerial view of their patchwork fields, Ethan felt a fist unclench somewhere beneath his ribs. He realized the farm was no longer a fragile island, but one stitch in communal fabric. Trouble, however, sneaks in disguise of plenty. In late July, a drought settled over the valley, a high-pressure dome baking the soil day after relentless day. The state issued burn bans pasture grass crisp to tinder. Ethan's pond receded, exposing cracked shoreline. The demonstration plot held better due to deep clover roots, yet even it wilted. Irrigation schedules strained the solar pumps, and the creek level dropped, forcing rotation water rationing. Board members in Manhattan fretted again, citing the pilot as dependent on volatile climate. Ava scoured meteorological models, concluding a tropical storm might break the dome, though forecasts waffled. Ethan, by contrast, turned to tradition. He recalled old diaries of his father, describing drought in 1947, and how they mulched rows with straw and shaded seedlings, using canvas stretched between cedar stakes. Supplies were scarce, so he resolved to repurpose. At dawn, he drove the battered pickup to the county landfill and hauled back discarded shipping pallets, their pine slats warped but salvageable. Over 3 sweltering days, the farm crew, teen volunteers, Ava, Sarah, and even Harold shedding his blazer, dismantled pallets, reassembling the wood into a frame shade structures. They draped them with burlap soaked in the last reserves of the rain barrel, creating a breathable canopy above the rye. Heat dropped 4 degrees under the shelters, just enough to keep tender heads from scorching. Drone imagery later showed shaded rows retaining 30% more moisture than exposed plots. Still, water remained short. County supervisors considered restricting agricultural draws, pitting orchardists against grain farmers. During an emergency meeting in the town hall, tempers flared hotter than the outside temperature. Banker Rutherford attempted to pit neighbors against Sinclair, arguing the Billionaire could simply truck in water. Ava countered by offering to bankroll an expedited reservoir dredging project that would increase storage for everyone, provided usage caps were equitable. Rutherford sputtered until Ethan stood, dusty and sunburned, and said quietly that survival should never be negotiable, and if the farm's pilot drew 1 gallon more than necessary, they would shut down the demonstration rather than cripple other livelihoods. Murmurs turned into applause. The motion passed to dredge, splitting the cost between Sinclair Holdings, the county, and a state resilience grant uncovered by Lily, the drone-savvy senior now working a paid internship. The dredging bought time, but the true reprieve arrived one sultry afternoon when sable clouds gathered over distant hills like a cavalry mustering. Thunder grumbled, and a single fat drop splashed on Henry's nose. He whooped, arms raised, and within minutes the sky unlocked a torrent. Rain hammered the shade structures, burlap sagging, soil gulping greedily. Ethan tipped back his head to let cool rivulets trace scars time and sun had carved, tears mixing with rain because sometimes relief is heavier than burden. 3 days of off-and-on storms refilled ponds, coaxed soybean leaves to unfurl, and set wildflowers flaming along ditches. With moisture atop summer heat, the rye accelerated, and soon seed heads bent under their own weight, gold brushed with copper. The demonstration team scheduled harvest for the 2nd week of August, drawing city journalists in droves. Ethan worried the spectacle would overshadow the work, yet he also sensed the narrative could seed similar projects elsewhere. He insisted on ground rules. Every visitor would ride in flatbed trailers, retrofitted with wood benches. Nobody would wear heels in the field, and each person would hand-cut at least one sheaf. Harvest day broke brilliant, cicadas whirring like distant chainsaws. Rows of rye rippled under a breeze scented with ripeness, and sunflowers bordering the plot turned their glossy faces toward the assembly of townsfolk, students, tourists, and executives. Ava looked resplendent in jeans smeared with pollination dust, and Harold rolled sleeves past his elbows, channeling ranch hand ancestors he had only read about. Sarah organized hydration coolers, scolding reporters who tried to skip the waterline. Ethan climbed onto the bed of his old flatbed, now parked at the field edge, and waited for chatter to quiet. He held up the original Loaf linen, washed and mended but still bearing faint stains. "A year ago today, I almost lost everything," he began, voice carrying. "I baked bread out of desperation. Turned out, desperation passed through heat and came out as hope. Today we cut new grain that sprang from ashes, sweat, and second chances. Hands that plant together should harvest together. So find a sickle or a scythe, follow someone who knows what they are doing, and let the field tell you the next part of the story." People spread across the plot, laughter rising, phones tucked away lest blades nick glass. The first sheaf fell with a soft shush, then another. Within half an hour, the air smelled like warm bread, even before kernels left the stalk. Henry darted among the dolts, tying bundles with twine. Lily flew the drone overhead, capturing mosaic footage that would later headline international sustainability conferences. After the last row fell, volunteers loaded sheaves onto wagons bound for a shared threshing barn, where an antique belt-driven thresher, loaned by a retired farmer and lovingly restored by Ted Loomis the mechanic, rattled dash. Like a carnival ride. Children fed heads into the hopper, grains raining into buckets, while straw shot out the other side in a golden fountain. Sarah took the first pail to the portable stone mill, turning crank while perspiration beat at her temples. Flour drifted into the pan, a snowfall of promise. Twilight found the entire crew seated at long tables under strings of LED bulbs. Lanterns illuminated, platters of farmhouse fare, roast chicken from neighbor coops, blistered peppers, sliced tomatoes still warm from vines, and at center, loaves baked from Phoenix grain, flour milled that very sass. Afternoon. The crust bore a smoky hint from the original fire, but inside the crumb tasted of sun and rain, and something older, something like memory made tangible. Ethan tore the first loaf, handed one piece to Ava, one to Harold, then stood. "Bread is only bread until shared," he said, echoing earlier words. "And stories are only stories until lived. Eat, remember, then carry what we learned beyond this valley." He raised his mug of cider. "To unseen roots and to open hands." The cheer that followed rolled down the hills, startling an owl from an elm, and cameras struggled to capture the shimmer in every eye. No one noticed Rutherford slipping away to discard the last of his fear, or Lily looking at a college brochure from the state agronomy program. But everyone felt the seam between past hardship and future possibility stitch closed in that moment. September ushered school buses rumbling along leaf-littered roads, their cargo of students eager to brag they had harvested grain eaten in five-star hotels across Sinclair properties worldwide. Ethan resumed typical chores, mending gates, checking fences, tinkering with the combine he might finally afford to trade up next season, but neighbors often found him standing at the ridge watching morning mist, Claire's locket warm against his chest. Sometimes Ava joined him, still staying at Mrs. Lopez's cottage though, making weekly trips to the city to oversee the foundation she launched. Loaves Forward, a fund that paired urban food insecurity programs with rural regenerative farms, financed in part by the sale of Phoenix grain artisanal products. She discovered her prep school network useful at last, in convincing pastry chefs that flour quality mattered as much as plating. Harold, too, adjusted. He created a new corporate division titled Earthside Projects, giving seats to young executives raised on farms. Quarterly calls now opened with soil snapshot reports before fiscal metrics. In boardrooms, skeptics remained, but Harold wielded the shareholder vote footage of millionaire brokers with dirt under their nails, as a reminder that stewardship stories boosted brand value beyond conventional brass advertising. Yet if profits ever conflicted with principles, he had vowed to follow Wyndham's compact. One brisk evening as Maples blushed scarlet, Ethan invited both Sinclairs, Sarah, Henry, and a host of townsfolk to the repainted barn for what he called a listening night. No agenda, no media, just voices. Lanterns hung from rafters, and a makeshift stage held a microphone. One by one, people shared how the last year changed them. A former skeptic spoke of newfound pride selling farmstay breakfasts. Lily announced her scholarship to the agronomy program. A shy orchardist confessed he started composting for the first time. Finally, Ava approached the mic, clearing her throat. "I ran because expectations felt heavier than silence," she said. "But this valley showed me responsibility is not a cage when shared." She paused, scanning faces lit by lantern glow. "I intend to split my time between here and wherever Loaf's forward partners need help. But I will always return for planting and harvest. Because my roots took hold the day I tasted one loaf and learned generosity does more than feed hunger. It rewrites hunger." Applause filled rafters. Ethan spoke last, holding Clara's locket in his palm. "I once thought losing land meant losing self. Now I see self as a story told through hands willing to give. You all taught me that." And Clara's voice echoes in it. He snapped the locket closed. "Let this place be proof that failure feeds the next crop, if we till it with honesty." They ended the night singing an old folk hymn, harmonies weaving between timber posts, the same hymn Ethan once hummed while planting alone after Clara passed. Harold's baritone found the tune, shaky but earnest, and as the final chord melted into autumn air, he felt the rare serenity of having contributed to a song, rather than directing it. Winter came again, gentler than the last, snowfall light and intermittent. Ethan's rebuilt barn bore the weight easily, its new timbers seasoned. On the anniversary of the blizzard, Harold drove alone down the county road, snow collecting in swirls. He carried no entourage, only a paper bag, absorbing warmth from a fresh loaf he and Ava had baked that morning in the corporate test kitchen. He knocked, Ethan answered, and together they walked to the old bus bench on Main. They sat, steam curling from the bread. Passing motorists slowed, curious, but the men paid no mind. Harold broke the loaf, handed half to Ethan. "Our turn," he said. They waited until a delivery driver from a distant city parked to check directions, his uniform showing stains of road salt and fatigue. Ethan rose, approached, and offered a slice. The driver blinked in surprise, then accepted, biting and smiling despite chattering teeth. No cameras caught the exchange, save perhaps the same security lens that began it all, but this time, no story would trend. The gesture existed for itself. A quiet circuit completed. Back at the farm later, Ethan placed the remaining bread on the windowsill to cool. Henry asked if they were rich now. Ethan thought about mortgages cleared, barns rebuilt, pipelines dredged, seeds banked, and replied that riches come and go, but wealth is knowing you can give without counting. Henry nodded, as though he already understood, then grabbed mittens and tromped outside to build snow forts that would melt by noon. Inside, Ethan poured 2 mugs of coffee, one for Sarah darning socks by the stove, one for himself. He looked through the window at fields hidden under snow yet alive beneath, roots waiting, and he sighed a contentment that settled deeper than any worry could burrow. He realized the story he feared would be taken from him had instead multiplied, woven into 1,000 new loaves baking in other hands across counties, states, countries. Kindness, he understood, is bread dough. You punch it down, it rises stronger, you divide it, it feeds more. Night fell softly, stars prickling the black. Faraway skyscrapers glittered, turbines spun, markets closed, but here only the creak of settling rafters broke silence. Ethan opened his mother's old ledger, writing one last entry. Balance forward. Gratitude. He closed the book. Outside, the wind sighed across dormant furrows, carrying with it the promise of another planting, another harvest, another chance for someone, somewhere, to choose generosity over fear. And on a bench in town, crumbs from a shared loaf glittered in moonlight, small memorials to the moment a struggling farmer gave his last bread and discovered in losing it, he gained a future he never dared imagine. The story, like the loaf, had been broken open, and its warmth now traveled beyond counting.